I'm gonna shut you down. You're too loud. Karen thought she could silence my garage band with endless complaints, so we opened a full-blown music school right in her backyard.
The noise complaint, it started innocently enough, the way most neighborhood disputes do. A quiet suburban street, neatly kept lawns, and the occasional barking dog or lawnmower breaking the silence. To most, the neighborhood was a picture of peaceful living, a place where families could raise children, retirees could enjoy their golden years, and weekend barbecues could fill the air with laughter. But to one woman, Karen, it was more than just a neighborhood. To her, it was a personal kingdom, a stage upon which she dictated the rules of what was acceptable and what was not. And unfortunately for us, our teenage passion for music would become the next battlefront in her never-ending crusade. The garage band was my younger brother's idea. He and his 3 friends, all high school juniors, had been spending their afternoons strumming guitars, beating on drums, and experimenting with sound. The garage, filled with mismatched amps, thrift store instruments, and posters of classic rock bands, became their sanctuary. They weren't polished, they weren't professional, but what they had was enthusiasm, and every session was filled with energy that made the walls shake and the floors thrum. Neighbors down the street would often smile as they walked their dogs, the faint echo of drums and guitar riffs reaching their ears. Some even complimented my parents, saying it reminded them of their own youth. But Karen wasn't amused. To her, the music wasn't just noise. It was an assault on her carefully crafted environment of order and control. The first complaint came in the form of a note, slipped into our mailbox. Neatly typed, sharp in tone, the letter warned that the excessive noise was disturbing the peace of the neighborhood. It carried no signature, but the condescending phrasing was unmistakably hers. She didn't ask, she demanded. She cited city noise ordinances and hinted that fines would soon follow if the music didn't stop. At first, my parents brushed it off. After all, the boys weren't playing late at night, and their sessions rarely stretched past dinner. But Karen wasn't the type to let something slide. If her first warning wasn't heeded, she would escalate. And escalate she did. One afternoon, during a particularly spirited jam session, she appeared at the edge of our driveway, arms crossed, her face twisted with fury. She didn't knock. She didn't wait for an invitation. Instead, she stormed up the driveway, pounding on the garage door until the music stopped. From behind the door, her muffled shouts carried words like disrespectful, unbearable, and inconsiderate, echoing even through the walls. The boys fell silent. Their excitement drained as quickly as it had surged. My parents, forced into the middle, stepped outside to confront her. Though I couldn't hear every word, the tone of her voice left no doubt. She wasn't simply annoyed. She was enraged, convinced that our garage band was a deliberate act of defiance against her authority. The days that followed brought new tactics. She called the police with noise complaints, though every time the officers arrived, they found nothing beyond the normal sounds of teenagers playing music in their own garage. They shrugged it off, apologizing, explaining that they had bigger issues to deal with. But Karen wasn't satisfied. She began patrolling the neighborhood like a self-appointed enforcer, clipboard in hand, recording every instance she could pin against us. A car parked slightly too close to the curb. She wrote it down. A trash bin left out an hour too long. Another mark on her list. The music may have been her main target, but she was determined to find any excuse to make life difficult. At school, the boys whispered about how unfair it was. They weren't doing anything wrong. They just wanted to play, to dream a little. But Karen, with her relentless complaints, was slowly crushing that dream. My parents, torn between supporting the kids and keeping peace in the neighborhood, tried to compromise. They suggested shorter practice sessions, keeping the garage door closed, even buying foam panels to muffle the sound. But no matter what adjustments were made, Karen still found fault. Her mission wasn't about the noise anymore. It was about control. Then came the letter that changed everything. Unlike her earlier anonymous notes, this one was official, stamped with the HOA's insignia. Karen, it turned out, had rallied her friends on the board to push through a rule banning amplified music in residential garages. It was a thinly veiled strike against us, crafted to appear as a community concern, but targeted squarely at the boys. The penalties for violating the rule were steep, fines that would pile up quickly, with threats of legal action if left unpaid. The garage, once a haven for creativity, suddenly felt like enemy territory. The boys stopped practicing, their instruments gathering dust. The laughter and energy that once filled the afternoons disappeared, replaced by frustration and resentment. Karen had won, or so she thought, because while she celebrated her victory, my father had other ideas. He wasn't the type to let petty tyranny stand unchecked. He knew Karen's weakness wasn't in her rules or her complaints. It was in her arrogance, her belief that she could dictate the lives of everyone around her without consequence. And if she thought she had silenced the music for good, she was about to learn just how wrong she was. The plan began quietly, almost invisibly at first. Conversations with old business partners, calls to the city about unused properties, a few visits to a dusty warehouse that hadn't seen life in years. It wasn't revenge for the sake of spite. It was a lesson, one Karen wouldn't forget, because soon, the faint sound of teenage guitars would be replaced with something far bigger, far louder, and far more permanent, and the walls of her pristine backyard would no longer shield her from the sound she despised most. The music was coming back, not in a garage, but in a way that would shake her world to its core. The warehouse! The warehouse sat just 2 blocks away, tucked behind a row of small shops and offices. It had once been part of a distribution center, but over the years it had been forgotten, left vacant and gathering dust. The concrete floors were cracked, the windows streaked with grime, and the smell of stale air lingered. To most, it was nothing more than a relic of a bygone era. To my father, however, it was potential. Raw, untapped, and perfectly situated. What made the warehouse truly interesting wasn't its size or its condition. It was its location. Karen's backyard bordered directly against the backlot of the property. From her porch, she could see the edge of the fence and the neglected building beyond it. She had always considered it an eyesore, something she wished the city would tear down. She had no idea that soon, that eyesore would become the very thing that unraveled her carefully controlled life. My father quietly began the process of leasing the warehouse. He spoke little of his intentions, but the gleam in his eye betrayed his excitement. He wasn't content with simply providing the boys a place to play. He wanted to turn Karen's petty crusade into a permanent reminder that she couldn't bully her way through life without consequences. Over the next few weeks, while Karen celebrated her so-called victory in silencing the garage band, changes began to stir. Contractors arrived, trucks parked outside, and men carried in supplies. At first, Karen assumed the city was finally acting on her complaints about the building. She smiled smugly, believing she had once again bent the world to her will. But as days passed, the truth began to emerge. The sound of construction filled the air. Walls were scrubbed clean, new paint covered the exterior, and large soundproofing panels were hauled inside. Electricians rewired the old circuits, and carpenters built small rooms along the edges of the massive open floor. Slowly, the lifeless warehouse began to transform. Karen, of course, couldn't resist prying. She lingered near the back of her yard, peering over the fence as the workers labored. She asked questions she wasn't entitled to ask, demanded explanations she wasn't owed. But the contractors, bound by nothing more than a paycheck, ignored her. Each unanswered question only fueled her suspicion. Something was happening, and she wasn't in control of it. That realization gnawed at her. Inside our home, the boys watched the progress with growing anticipation. Their instruments, once silent, came back to life as they rehearsed in preparation for something bigger than they had ever imagined. My father kept the details close to his chest, but it was obvious he had a vision that extended beyond a simple practice space. He wasn't just giving the kids back their music. He was building something larger, something permanent. The reveal came one Saturday morning when a new sign was mounted above the freshly painted entrance. Bold letters declared, Riverside School of Music. Beneath it, smaller text announced, now enrolling students of all ages. It wasn't just a place for the boys to play. It was an entire music school, open to the public, designed to echo with the sound of lessons, rehearsals, and performances. Where once Karen had complained about the noise of a single garage band, she would now face the reality of dozens of instruments playing daily. Right in her backyard, the neighborhood buzzed with excitement. Parents eager for extracurricular activities signed up their children. Retirees looking to learn piano or guitar filled out applications. Teachers were hired, instruments were delivered, and flyers spread throughout the community. What Karen saw as chaos, everyone else saw as opportunity. Karen, however, was livid. The moment she read the sign, she stormed to the HOA board, demanding they intervene. She argued that the school violated neighborhood rules, that it would bring traffic, noise, and disruption. But the warehouse wasn't part of the HOA. It wasn't bound by their covenants or restrictions. Legally, there was nothing she could do. Her fury only grew as the first lessons began. Children arrived after school, their laughter filling the lot. Pianos played scales. Violins screeched as students learned their first notes, and drums thundered in steady practice beats. The very noises she had tried to silence were now multiplying, filling her backyard with a constant reminder that she had lost. But Karen wasn't one to accept defeat quietly. She began documenting every car that parked near her property, photographing families as they walked their children to lessons. She filed noise complaints with the city, insisting the school was disrupting the peace. Inspectors came, measured sound levels, and left unimpressed. The building was soundproofed, and nothing violated local ordinances. Each attempt to shut the school down only highlighted her pettiness. The community, once indifferent to her antics, began to grow weary of her constant interference. Parents whispered about her hostility. Children avoided her glare, and even her own friends on the HOA board hesitated to back her. What had once been her power base was beginning to crack. Inside her home, Karen seethed. Every note that drifted through her windows was salt in the wound. She had gone from silencing a garage band to living beside a symphony of students, their music growing stronger each day. And deep down, she knew it wasn't by accident. It was deliberate. My father hadn't just countered her crusade. He had built a monument to her failure. But Karen wasn't done fighting. If she couldn't stop the music through the HOA or the city, she would find other ways. And as her desperation grew, so too did the lengths she was willing to go. Because to Karen, this wasn't just about noise anymore. It was about pride, and she would rather burn bridges, destroy reputations, and even risk everything than admit she had lost control of her kingdom. Karen strikes back. The opening weeks of the music school were filled with excitement and energy. Students shuffled in and out, carrying instrument cases larger than themselves. Laughter mingled with the uneven tones of practice sessions, and teachers encouraged their pupils with patient determination. What had once been a lifeless warehouse was now alive, brimming with creativity and potential. But behind her manicured hedges, Karen simmered. Every note, every scale, Every imperfect squeak of a clarinet felt like an insult aimed directly at her. She had fought so hard to silence a handful of teenagers, and now she was trapped in a soundscape she couldn't control. It wasn't just background noise to her. It was humiliation. Her first line of attack came in the form of petitions. She went door to door, clipboards in hand, insisting that the school was a menace. She painted vivid pictures of traffic jams, safety hazards, and property values plummeting. A few neighbors, intimidated by her presence, or eager to avoid conflict, scribbled signatures. But the majority refused. Many had children or grandchildren enrolled already, and others simply saw through her exaggerated claims. The petitions went nowhere. Next came the anonymous complaints. Families arriving at the school found angry notes under their windshield wipers, warning them that they were destroying the neighborhood. Teachers discovered letters slipped under the doors, accusing them of corruption, noise pollution, even child endangerment. The tone of the letters was sharp, bitter, and unmistakably hers. When that failed to stop the school, Karen escalated further. She called in every possible authority: zoning inspectors, fire marshals, even animal control. One afternoon, an officer arrived after she claimed there was illegal livestock being kept inside the warehouse. The bewildered man left shaking his head when he found nothing more exotic than a cello. Each failed attempt chipped away at her credibility. Where once the HOA had treated her as their unofficial enforcer, now they rolled their eyes at her dramatics. But Karen wasn't deterred. In her mind, the community was blind, the authorities were corrupt, and only she saw the truth. And if no one else would fight the battle, she would escalate until someone listened. It began with small acts of sabotage. Locks on the back door mysteriously jammed, forcing teachers to call locksmiths. Flyers advertising lessons were torn down from telephone poles almost as soon as they went up. Trash bags, ripped open and scattered, appeared across the parking lot, always late at night. Each time, the staff suspected Karen, but they lacked proof. Then came the night the power went out. Midway through a piano lesson, the lights flickered and died, plunging the warehouse into darkness. Parents rushed to gather their children as teachers scrambled with flashlights. When electricians inspected the building the next day, they found the main breaker box had been tampered with. It wasn't an accident. It was deliberate vandalism. The police were called, reports filed, but without evidence, nothing could be done. Karen remained smugly out of reach, watching from her backyard with a self-satisfied smirk as the school struggled to recover. To her, this was justice. To the rest of the neighborhood, it was becoming something darker. But while she reveled in her sabotage, she didn't realize her actions were turning the community against her. Parents whispered about her cruelty. Teachers warned one another to be cautious. And children, once indifferent, began to fear her. Her reputation, carefully maintained for years, was unraveling before her eyes. The breaking point came on a crisp autumn evening. During the school's first recital, families gathered inside the renovated warehouse, folding chairs lined in neat rows, the stage adorned with simple decorations. Nervous children tuned instruments, while parents chatted excitedly. It was a celebration of the school's progress, a moment of pride for everyone involved. Karen, however, saw it as an affront. As the recital began, she stormed into the parking lot with her phone in hand, recording the crowd, narrating loudly about how illegal gatherings were destroying the neighborhood. She shouted at families as they walked inside, accusing them of trespassing, of contributing to criminal activity. Parents shielded their children's ears. As she ranted, her voice shrill and piercing. When security asked her to leave, she refused, planting herself in the middle of the entrance and blocking anyone from coming or going. The recital paused. Whispers spread through the crowd, and the event teetered on the edge of collapse. It was only when the police arrived, called by a frantic teacher, that she was finally removed. her screams echoing into the night as flashing lights carried her away. The recital continued, shaky but determined, and when the final notes were played, the audience rose in thunderous applause. For the school, it was a victory. For Karen, it was another humiliation. But as she sat fuming in her home that night, one thought burned brighter than her shame. She wasn't finished. Not yet. Because Karen had convinced herself of one thing above all. If she couldn't stop the music, then she would make sure no one enjoyed it. And her next move would take the conflict from petty sabotage into dangerous territory. Breaking Point Karen's humiliation at the recital only hardened her resolve. While the rest of the community praised the music school for bringing life and joy to the neighborhood, she stewed in bitterness. Every laugh she overheard, every flyer announcing new classes, every note of music drifting through her windows felt like an insult carved directly into her pride. Her tactics grew bolder, more reckless. She no longer limited herself to anonymous letters or quiet sabotage. Instead, she confronted families directly, standing at the edge of her yard and berating them as they walked to lessons. She accused them of being bad parents, of encouraging their children to waste time on noise instead of discipline. Some ignored her, others shouted back, but all of them left with the same impression. Karen had gone too far. The first real danger came one late evening. The final lesson had ended, and the last students were filing out with their parents. As the lights inside dimmed, smoke began to rise from the dumpster near the back of the lot. Someone had set fire to it, the flames licking upward before being quickly contained. Security footage caught a shadowy figure darting away, the outline and gait unmistakably matching Karen's. The fire department arrived, the police took statements, and the incident was classified as arson. But with no clear face on the footage, no charges could stick. Karen avoided accountability again, though whispers circulated through the neighborhood, louder than ever. My father tightened security at the school. Cameras were added, motion sensor lights installed, and staff members remained vigilant. Yet no amount of preparation could stop Karen's determination. She prowled the back fence like a predator, recording every sound, filing new complaints daily. City inspectors, tired of her constant calls, began to ignore them altogether. But Karen didn't care. She saw herself as a warrior in a one-woman war. Her breaking point came during the holiday season, when the school organized a winter concert. Flyers promised a night of carols, student performances, and even a small choir. The entire community rallied around it. Parents decorated, children rehearsed, and excitement buzzed in the air. Karen, of course, saw it as an assault. The thought of dozens of voices raised in song, echoing through her walls, pushed her beyond reason. On the night of the concert, while families filed into the warehouse, Karen plotted her disruption. As the choir began their first song, the unmistakable wail of sirens pierced the night. Fire trucks, police cars, and even an ambulance swarmed the lot. Karen had called in a false emergency, claiming the warehouse was overcrowded, unsafe, and in immediate danger of collapse. Panic rippled through the crowd as flashing lights filled the parking lot. Parents grabbed their children, fearful of disaster. But when inspectors and officers entered, they found nothing amiss. The school was up to code, the fire exits clear, and the occupancy within safe limits. Slowly the panic faded, replaced by frustration and anger. The officers traced the call back to its source, Karen's phone. This time, she couldn't hide. In front of the entire community, she was confronted, her frantic excuses drowned out by the murmurs of furious parents. She tried to spin the story as concern for safety, but no one believed her anymore. Her false report was documented, and though she narrowly avoided arrest that night, her reputation collapsed entirely. For the first time, the community turned on her. Parents shouted at her in the parking lot. Children whispered about her cruelty. and even her closest allies on the HOA board distanced themselves. The woman who had once wielded fear and authority was now the subject of ridicule and disdain. Yet even then, Karen refused to admit defeat. Instead, she retreated into her home, plotting her next move. If the community wouldn't side with her, if the authorities dismissed her complaints, she would escalate further. She told herself she wasn't obsessed. She was right, and in her mind, being right justified everything. Meanwhile, the school continued to thrive. Enrollment grew, recitals filled with applause, and the warehouse became a beacon of joy for the neighborhood. My father's plan had not only revived the boys' dream, but it also brought people together in ways no one had expected. But the brighter the school shone, the darker Karen's resentment grew. She had become the villain of her own story, but in her eyes, she was still the victim, persecuted, ignored, and betrayed by those she once ruled over. And so, as the new year dawned, the stage was set for Karen's most dangerous scheme yet. One that would no longer involve complaints or petty sabotage, but a direct attack that threatened everything the school had built. The final sabotage. Winter's chill faded into early spring, but Karen's bitterness only grew colder. The community that once tolerated her antics now openly resented her. Children whispered her name like a villain in a ghost story. Parents crossed the street to avoid her, and the HOA board, embarrassed by her behavior, quietly stripped her of influence. For most, such isolation would have been a wake-up call. But for Karen, it only deepened her obsession. She convinced herself that the music school wasn't just a nuisance. It was the root of all her problems. She believed the school had stolen her respect, her authority, and even her peace of mind. If the school disappeared, she told herself, everything would go back to the way it was. So, Karen set her mind on destruction. The plan was reckless, born not of strategy, but of desperation. She would break into the warehouse after hours and ruin it from the inside. Instruments, sheet music, and equipment. She intended to destroy them all. To her, it wasn't vandalism. It was justice. One late night, clad in dark clothes, she crept along the fence that separated her yard from the school's back lot. The cameras my father had installed still blinked faintly in the darkness, but Karen had convinced herself she could avoid them. She carried a crowbar in one hand, a flashlight in the other, her movements shaky with both adrenaline and fear. She pried open a side door, slipping into the dimly lit warehouse. The silence inside was heavy, broken only by her uneven breaths. The once vibrant space, lined with music stands, neatly stored instruments, and colorful posters, now stood vulnerable before her. Karen moved quickly, smashing a guitar against the floor, scattering drumsticks, and tearing sheet music from binders. She swung her crowbar at amplifiers, denting metal and cracking plastic. Each blow echoed through the building, each crash feeding her delusion that she was finally taking back control. But what she didn't realize was that the school's upgraded security system had already been triggered. Silent alarms sent alerts to my father's phone, to the police, and even to a private security company monitoring the site. While Karen raged in the darkness, her time was running out. Outside, flashing lights soon pierced the night. Patrol cars screeched into the lot, their headlights flooding the walls. Officers spilled out, weapons drawn, shouting commands. Karen froze, the crowbar still raised in her hands, her face caught in the glare of their lights. The reality of the situation crashed down on her. This wasn't a petty complaint or a harmless letter. This was breaking and entering. Destruction of property and criminal intent. The officers advanced, their voices sharp, and for the first time, Karen dropped her weapon. They escorted her outside in handcuffs as neighbors gathered in their yards. Awakened by the commotion, whispers spread through the crowd, disbelief mixing with a grim sense of inevitability. Many had predicted she would go too far one day, but none had imagined she'd be marched out of the warehouse like a common criminal. My father arrived moments later, his expression a mixture of anger and pity. The warehouse stood damaged, but not destroyed. Karen hadn't had enough time to finish what she started. Still, the sight of her being led away was enough to cement her downfall. The charges were serious: vandalism, trespassing, breaking and entering, and filing false reports from her earlier stunts. The community that once tiptoed around her now openly condemned her. Parents voiced outrage. The HOA distanced themselves completely, and even her closest allies refused to defend her. But even as she sat in the back of the patrol car, Karen muttered to herself, convinced she was the victim of a conspiracy. She didn't see her actions as crimes. She saw them as her last stand. To her, she wasn't being arrested for wrongdoing. She was being punished for being right in a world that refused to listen. The next day, the neighborhood buzzed with talk. Families who had suffered under Karen's rule for years shared their stories openly now, no longer afraid of her retaliation. They spoke of her petty fines, her harassment, her endless complaints. The image of Karen as a protector of the neighborhood was shattered completely. Meanwhile, the music school rallied. Volunteers arrived to help repair the damage. Parents donated new equipment, and local businesses even pitched in with supplies. What Karen had tried to destroy became stronger than before, fueled by the community's determination to see it thrive. For the first time, Karen's house felt small, insignificant. Where once she had ruled the street through fear, now she was a pariah. Her name spoken with disdain. And as the school prepared for its biggest event yet, a community-wide concert, she was left on the outside, watching her kingdom crumble. But Karen's downfall wasn't fully complete. That would come when the entire neighborhood gathered for the concert. A celebration not just of music, but of freedom from her tyranny. The concert of Freedom Spring gave way to summer, and with it came renewal. The warehouse turned music school, once scarred by Karen's sabotage, now stood stronger than ever. The broken instruments had been replaced, the damaged equipment upgraded, and the walls bore fresh coats of paint. If Karen's intention had been to silence the music, she had only succeeded in amplifying it. The school's staff, parents and students rallied around one idea: a grand concert open to the entire community. It would be more than just a recital. It would be a statement that creativity couldn't be silenced, that community would triumph over pettiness, and that Karen's reign of intimidation was finally over. Flyers flooded mailboxes, posters lined the streets, and the buzz of excitement spread like wildfire. Families marked the date eagerly. Students practiced with determination, and volunteers worked tirelessly to prepare the warehouse for the biggest event it had ever hosted. And looming just beyond the fence, Karen watched it all unfold. She was no longer the woman strutting down the street with a clipboard in hand, barking orders and filing complaints. Now, she was a shadow of her former self. The HOA had cut ties. The police still had her case open, and neighbors avoided her completely. She was isolated, a pariah in the very community she had once dominated. Yet, in true Karen fashion, she convinced herself the concert was an attack on her personally, a final insult. She muttered bitterly from her porch, pacing back and forth. But there was nothing she could do. Legal restrictions and community disdain kept her in check. The battle she had once fought so ferociously was over. The night of the concert arrived. The parking lot overflowed with cars. Families streamed toward the warehouse, and the faint glow of stage lights poured through the windows. Inside, rows of chairs stretched across the floor, filled with eager faces. Students stood ready with their instruments, nervous but proud. while teachers offered reassuring smiles. The first notes rang out, tentative yet beautiful. A piano solo drifted through the room, followed by the steady beat of drums and the harmony of violins. The sound was imperfect, but it was alive, filled with passion. The audience erupted in applause after each performance, their cheers drowning out any lingering shadows of doubt. Outside, the music spilled into the night air, carried on the breeze straight into Karen's backyard. She sat on her porch, hands gripping her armrests, the sound surrounding her like a cage she couldn't escape. The very thing she had tried so hard to silence now filled every corner of her home. As the concert built to its finale, the full ensemble took the stage. Dozens of students, their instruments poised, launched into a triumphant piece that filled the warehouse with soaring notes. The sound spilled over the fence, echoing across the street, reverberating against Karen's walls. It was not the noise of rebellion, but the sound of freedom. Inside, parents rose to their feet, clapping, cheering, tears streaming down proud faces. The community, once fractured by Karen's petty wars, now stood united in joy. The warehouse shook, not with conflict, but with celebration. And in that moment, Karen's downfall was complete. She hadn't just lost her battle against a garage band. She had lost her influence, her reputation, and her grip on the neighborhood she once ruled with fear. All that remained was the hollow echo of her own stubbornness, drowned out by the music she despised. As the final note rang out, the crowd erupted into thunderous applause, the sound spilling into the night sky. Neighbors hugged, children beamed, and my father stood at the back of the room, smiling quietly. The plan he had set into motion months earlier had come full circle. Karen's tyranny was over, and in its place stood a legacy of music, joy, and community. The warehouse doors swung open, and families spilled into the lot, their laughter filling the air. The concert had ended, but the music lingered, echoing into the night, a reminder that creativity cannot be caged, and that bullies, no matter how loud, will always fall silent in the end. And just beyond the fence, Karen sat alone, the music washing over her house like a tide she could never stop. For the rest of us, it was victory. For her, it was the sound of defeat.